Once upon a time, in the bustling streets of London during the early 1800s, there lived a kind, curious, and somewhat naive gentleman named Mr. Samuel Pickwick. He was older than most of his friends, wore small round glasses, and had a habit of seeing the best in everyone. Mr. Pickwick loved to learn about people's lives. That is why he created the Pickwick Club, a group devoted to traveling around England and exploring human nature. Mr. Pickwick was not alone in his adventures. He had 3 close companions, also members of his club. Mr. Tracy Tupman, who fancied himself a romantic man. He was always ready to admire a pretty face or fall in love at first sight. Mr. Augustus Snodgrass, who dreamed of being a great poet, but was rather shy and rarely wrote any verses. Mr. Nathaniel Winkle, a young fellow who liked to call himself a sportsman. Yet whenever he tried to shoot a gun or ride a horse, he often ended up in funny accidents. Together, these 4 friends formed a merry group, eager to make observations of English life, meet interesting people, and send reports back to their fellow members in London. Their hearts were kind, but their journeys led them into one misadventure after another. When the Pickwickians first set out, they traveled by coach and carriage, staying at small inns in different towns. Mr. Winkle tried to show off his hunting skills, only to nearly shoot one of his companions by mistake. Mr. Tupman would see a charming lady and attempt to court her, often causing misunderstandings with jealous fiancés or husbands. Mr. Snodgrass stayed in the background, secretly wishing he could be brave enough to write beautiful poetry about everything they saw. Mr. Pickwick took all these mishaps in good humor, believing that each disaster was simply a lesson about human behavior. He made careful notes in his little journal, hoping to share these stories with the rest of the club. During one of their stops in London, Mr. Pickwick's life changed when he met a young boot cleaner named Sam Weller. Sam was clever, cheerful, and spoke in a fast, witty way. He had a knack for twisting common sayings into funny remarks, often called Wellerisms. Impressed by Sam's quick thinking and loyalty, Mr. Pickwick hired Sam to be his personal valet, a kind of servant who helps with luggage, clothing, and errands. Sam quickly became more than just a servant. He was a guide, a bodyguard, and even a friend. Whenever Mr. Pickwick or the others stumbled into trouble, Sam found a solution, whether it was convincing an angry landlord to calm down or escaping embarrassing social situations. As the group continued traveling, Mr. Tupman fell madly in love with a woman named Rachel, which led to comical jealousies. Mr. Winkle tried to show off his bravery in duels or horse riding, often messing up and causing more chaos. Meanwhile, Mr. Snodgrass tiptoed around a blooming affection for a young lady, but was too shy to admit it. These romances were light-hearted and full of misunderstandings. Sometimes Mr. Pickwick had to step in to rescue his friends' reputations. He was like a father figure trying to keep peace wherever he went. One of the most famous and problematic adventures began when Mrs. Bardell, Mr. Pickwick's landlady, misunderstood a conversation and believed Mr. Pickwick was proposing marriage. In truth, Mr. Pickwick was simply discussing Sam Weller's role in the household. Mrs. Bardell fainted with excitement at the proposal, and the misunderstanding spread quickly. Before Mr. Pickwick could explain, Mrs. Bardell took him to court for breach of promise, claiming he had promised to marry her and then abandoned her. Although innocent, Mr. Pickwick found himself caught in a complicated and absurd lawsuit. The court scene was hilarious, but also highlighted how the legal system could twist facts and prey upon confusion. Despite having a good heart, Mr. Pickwick lost the case because the jury believed Mrs. Bardell's story. He refused to pay the damages, convinced it was unjust. This led to him being sent to debtor's prison, a place where people who couldn't pay certain fines or debts were locked up. Debtor's prison was a gloomy, crowded place, filled with people who owed money. Mr. Pickwick's spirit nearly broke when he saw the sufferings of the poor there. Yet he insisted on staying true to his belief that he was wrongly accused. Sam Weller, ever loyal, tried to find ways to help Mr. Pickwick. Sam even offered to go to prison with him to make sure his master was not alone. Finally, through a series of fortunate events and a change of circumstances for Mrs. Bardell, Mr. Pickwick was released. He chose to pay off certain debts and help many people he met in prison. By doing so, he showed that kindness could exist even in the darkest places. Sam stayed by his side, and the whole ordeal strengthened their bond. When Mr. Pickwick left prison, he felt older and wiser. He returned to his peaceful rooms with Sam Weller, knowing that adventures with the Pickwick Club were coming to an end. Many of his friends found happiness. Some married, some moved away, and others chose quiet lives. Mr. Pickwick himself decided to retire in comfort, surrounded by the people he cared about. But the story ends on a happy and satisfying note. Mr. Pickwick realizes that his grand study of human nature led him through laughter, mistakes, friendships, and lessons about generosity. Throughout every mishap, his gentle heart never changed, and he always offered forgiveness and help. The final chapters see Mr. Pickwick content, reflecting on all the funny, strange, and eye-opening events that shaped his journey.